You know, you go on the street, everybody knows slavery is wrong. But we only deem it wrong because the degree of which was so blatant and obvious. But in principle, slavery has never actually vanished. The degree has only been reduced to to a less obvious predicament, if you will.
Mm.
And herein lies the key to understanding the very principle of slavery. In slavery, it doesn't require continuous physical violence to slaves being kept on a cotton field, on a plantation, for instance. They were forced around, and the slaves were not like forced around and whipped with a cat o' nine tails incessantly. What it does require is continuous duress. Duress is the state where beings are being kept in a continual threat of violence. People are being threatened with violence if they do not conform with the wishes of the master.
Mm.
So as long as they comply, no one is being harmed. So you are free to do as you're told. And in our situation, it appears as if people are free, but the dynamic is the same exact dynamic is taking place. You are free within the boundary conditions of authority as long as you don't start to question it. Now, authority over another being is slavery under duress. During the era when people with dark skin tones were held as slaves, it was readily observable that people were slaves. However, today it isn't necessarily readily observable that violence will be done unto you unless you continue to conform to the wishes of authority figures. And as we just established, what our rightful and rudimentary property is in life, this is not the natural state of reality as it is supposed to be. It isn't. We aren't supposed to live according to the whims of another being whom is not less or is not more isn't more valuable than ourselves, I should say, because we own our body, we own our free will, and we own the fruits of our own intrinsic and rightfully acquired physical mediums of exchange. And that is why people have always sensed that something was wrong about the system. There was always this something gnawing at them. Intuitively, people have always been struck by this sense of dissatisfaction. And this isn't because people are inherently grateful, as the system often promulgates, as we'll talk about later, but people have been convinced that there is no problem in it. And instead of following that which they sense, they continue to live their lives casually inside of the boundaries of this system that they are living within.
Mm.
And, you know, as soon as those gates, you could call them, of what you are free and able to do within this system, creep in more and more and more. At one time, you're free to do this, and the next time it's a crime, which is what we've experienced over the last couple of years. There is less room for you to do as you please because you have less room inside of this, the boundary conditions that are imposed onto you compared to the last time. And what that is when people essentially started seeing things clearly to an extent after these couple of years, and are being somewhat active in its mitigation, but not in its total abolition. I compare that to going from like 2 whips a day to 7 whips a day. And what many people want is to just go back to 2 whips a day instead of 7, because 7 is just too painful. But to say no whips is where we should point our attention at if we are to change the world condition. What I want to get to is why people are yet so amenable, why people acquiesce to this condition of not having proper ownership over what you actually own. And everybody who is honest with themselves knows that if you choose to show resentment or dissidence against the face of authority, like governments and etc., violence will be done unto you. They will trespass. They will introduce themselves. They will welcome themselves into your home. They will assault you, confine you, and ultimately murder you if the resentment shows itself to be uncontrollable, which also reveals itself to be a very appropriate term, actually. Violence, as in violation. They are violating your right to your own property. All things that we all have no right to do, as we all agreed upon earlier, because we all have the same rights. Yet some people magically possess the right to do the very things that are actually harmful deeds. Why? What makes these people so special? And in truth, nothing does. They aren't called authorities for no reason. Authority contains the word author, so the writer of a scribble. And they write down scribbles, they make things up. And there is no fixedness to them. They are wholeheartedly arbitrary and are dependent on nothing more than the individual whims and people who believe in them. They are not based on true morality, like we've discussed before, not transgressing upon people's right to their own freedom, the right to decide over their own body, their own choices, etc., living in harmony with one another. Yet the very essence of a government is nothing but the aforementioned violations. They do not come along and make voluntary suggestions for you to consider with your judgments, addressing your take on the situation, trying to give you your stance on the situation. They make demands, and one cannot choose to demur or refuse such a demand, lest incurring violent outcomes. And that's all they do. And vast amounts of people comply because they don't want to have any violence done unto them. And, of course, this is the mindset that one has to, quote unquote, that one has the quote unquote moral obligation to comply, unless you're a bad person or you're a criminal. And this is all that waylays the total abolition of slavery. And the reason why abolition has eluded humanity has to do with manipulation, obviously. And I am not the first and the last to state this, obviously. But allow me to clarify what I mean by that, by, manipulation as the culprit, as the main culprit. Manipulation has to do with the psyche, as many would agree. If it wasn't for the ego, then we wouldn't actually understand their own sovereignty and the fact that nobody can control you and reign over you according to their own individual whims, but that you govern yourself and you are your own leader. That's its purpose, to prevent us from limiting ourselves within the boundaries of collective thinking, of collectivism, thinking that the group is more important than the individual. It is protecting our uniqueness. The understanding and the acknowledgement of our uniqueness is from whence all our unthinkable capabilities, if you will, that's where they bear fruit. Beyond a fear of being disapproved by the rest, because many people eventually start to look for approval. Now, the ego helps to remind you that you don't need anyone else's approval. That is why culture and institutionalized ostensible religions condemn it, because it doesn't want you to express your uniqueness so that you understand that you're not bound by limits. And you can achieve everything you wish to acquire, everything that you aspire to. They want you to conform. They want you to always look to the approval of the herd, so that a few people can more easily control the many, and so that you can become more predictable instead. Because they fear what you can become ultimately, because they know what you're capable of achieving. And if that expresses itself, their control system would absolutely perish. Authority is the ultimate conceit. It lays people low lest they believe that it is they and not the law which has value. Like Jeremy Locke, the writer of The End of All Evil, lavishly put it. And pride is an understanding. Pride is an understanding of your worth. Culture condemns it in order to suggest that you are really not of sufficient value to do, say, or accomplish things that you desire, like freedom and understanding your worth and the things that you want beyond the limitations of privileges within the system. The slave masters and their henchmen couldn't possibly enslave such a large number of people if the people didn't believe that they were rightful slaves and property of other people, that they had a moral obligation to obey someone else's decrees over their own life, that their own property was also someone else's property, and they could decide what you can do with it and take it away from you if you don't conform to their own will. There were these surely if people know the works of Frederick Douglass, there were these ideas during the epoch of slavery that postulated that you steal yourself from the master if you wanted to be free, and that you were too prideful and too arrogant and egotistic if you ever wanted to be free. If you ever wanted to steal yourself from the master, imagine that.